Welcome to Quilting on the Side, the podcast for quilters who are building a business while juggling real life.
I'm Tori from Hey Tori, a quilter, past pattern designer and teacher, and now a digital marketing coach for quilting entrepreneurs.
And I'm Andi from True Blue Quilts, long arm quilter, pattern designer, and quilting instructor.
Between the two of us, we've taught workshops, launched programs, joined summits, and stayed up way too late trying to finish one more quilt binding.
On this show, we're sharing what's worked and what hasn't in our interviews from incredible guests, everyone from quilting solo business owners to CEOs.
If you're running a quilting or creative business or dreaming about starting one, you'll find real talk, honest strategies, and a whole lot of support here.
So grab your notebook, grab your pen, and let's dive into another episode of Quilting on the Side. Welcome back to another episode of Quilting on the Side. We're so glad you have joined us today. And I know, Tori, we've talked about how much fun and what a good experience it was when you went to H&H this year with your book. So that was a self-published effort. I've self-published my pattern books, and we thought that would be a great discussion to have here for our audience because I'm sure if it's a dream for us, it's a dream for other people too.
Definitely. We wanted to have an episode where we dedicated an episode to talking about how more people can do what we did, which was self-publish. So I wanted to lead our audience first before we get really into our advice and experiences and stuff into a few reflection questions to help them figure out if a book is something they want to pursue, whether it's now or in the future. And I've gotten really into self-publishing, even after I self-published, I read 3 more books on self-publishing because I have this really great idea that I'll share later on. But I read this book published. It's called Published: The Proven Path from Blank Page to 10,000 Copies Sold by Chandler Bolt. And I can link that below our podcast in the show notes so you guys can read it if you want. But he has some really great reflection questions that can kind of get you thinking about if I could write a book about what I know. And I really like these questions. So I'm going to go ahead and pose them. I'm going to pause after each one and just give you guys a second to reflect. Now, if you are able to write down some answers, this could be even more powerful for you. If you're like, hey, a book has always been a dream of mine, or it's been like me, it was kind of in the back of my mind, like this could maybe happen someday. So go ahead and take a pen and paper and write down your answers to these.
And I'm going to share my answers after Tori asks the question.
Excellent. Okay, so, and you can always pause too, because this is a recording. But number one, the first question is, what do you get paid for? What's your expertise? Like if I walked into your job or into your business even and tried to take over your responsibilities, what could you write about in that? And I would even include like lessons learned within all that. So that's the first question, first reflection.
Oh my gosh. So I have years, decades of experiences to draw on when I think about teaching someone else to do my job because I've got my day job and Tori and I have shared that or she has moved on, but I am still working for an industry outside of quilting and but it's education based. It's adult training materials. And so developing those trainings, I know I can explain things and teach things to people. So that's one aspect of my job. And then, of course, with the quilting, uh, I come up with my own patterns. I see quilts. I'm pointing to the one behind me, and I know how to logically construct those so I can teach quilt making. And then I have a long arm, so I can teach long arming. The whole adventure of building a business is another topic. So yeah, there's lots of stuff to talk about.
That was a great answer. Did I answer two?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I did write a book on exactly this topic, really, because I was a tech trainer at the time. I felt like part of the reason I wrote the book was that my skills weren't being utilized. Like all the knowledge that I knew, all the practice I had, all the the love of research that I love to do. I didn't feel like I was being utilized in that role very well. It was mostly a copy and paste kind of role, which was very boring. So I could teach on how to be a tech trainer, how to create, I could write a book on how to create tech, what do you call them? Been on the job for a few months and I can't remember what they're all
Like
called.
manuals or
Yeah, like manuals, exactly. Our training guides, that's what we call them, our training guides. Like I could write a book about that. I did write a book about how to teach quilting, which is the thing that I really loved to do just a few years before I wrote the book. And anything else, I think, might be the just the love of research and organizing and how to take what you learned and turn it into something that could be sold. Because I feel like I've done that with my business over and over and over again with pattern design workshops, quilting, even different aspects of quilting, and just now self-publishing. Okay, so that's the first question. So our second reflection question is, what are you passionate about? Now, I'm always a person that is like, I'm not really passionate. Like that's a word that kind of doesn't really connect with me. So I would say, what are you most curious about? So either one of those. What are you most passionate about or curious about? And is there a topic you know a lot about?
well, as anyone who's followed True Blue Quilts for the past couple years knows, I am really curious about different things you can do with half rectangle triangles. And in fact, the quilt I'm sitting in front of is all made with those units. And so I'm deep into my HRT phase. So
Andy, I'm hearing an HRT book, just saying.
well, I have another question about topics, but I'm going to save that for after the reflection period.
All right. I feel like I already covered what I'm most curious about and passionate about at the moment because I've been devouring books on self-publishing. So I've been really, really curious. That's where my interest and the closest thing I have to passion is.
Mhm.
Okay, and then the third reflection question is, what do people come to you for advice on? So what are you known for amongst your family and friends? I would even throw in there your network. So even if that is like your quilting guild and things like that, where you may not necessarily call all of them friends, but they come to you for advice. They send people to you for this or that. So what do people come to you for?
Yeah, and I'm going to focus this on the local quilt shop because, we're quilting on the side and that's going to be our focus. And I get a lot of referrals for my long arm quilting because apparently I am one of the few custom free motion quilters left. A lot of people recently, over the last 3, 4 years, they've been buying their own long arms. I mean, there's lots and lots of machines that are more affordable now, I think, for the home quilter. And they're computerized. And so people can just, you know, set up a edge to edge design and quilt for people, but there's always those few quilts that people want something else. And if you've built your whole business around computerized, digitized designs, you don't have that skill. So I'm very proud of the fact that I'm still offering custom quilting to people. So that's definitely one thing that people come to me for. And then I was at my open sew day, and it's so funny because people are always like, well, just ask Andi. So whenever they get stuck on a pattern or, can't figure out the next step, or they get a panel and they want to make it into a certain size quilt. Oh, ask Andi, she can figure it out. So some of those design and teaching skills are definitely what I'm known for.
Thinking for myself, mine's actually fairly similar when I was in Arizona, when I was long arming in the local shop and teaching there. I had a lot of people asking about free motion quilting, whether that's on domestic or on the long arm. That could be a really fun book. And then I'm also thinking lately, I've been getting a lot of "Hey Tories," which is really exciting. Whenever someone sends me a message, they typically start with "Hey Tori," which is awesome. And that's how I'm shifting my business name. And it's all working out there. So that's really fun. But they ask about being stuck and really trying to get from one point to the next. And I've developed this set of questions and prompts and tools and frameworks that I can use to answer those questions. And this is getting me really excited because I'm like, oh my gosh, I am. I'm actually like, this could be a book.
We're gonna
Oh
have
my goodness.
outlines ready at the end of this episode. Watch
I
out.
might have to. My kids are in bed, so I might just sit down and start outlining a book. Anyway, okay, so that's what was that? That was three. Okay. Then the fourth reflection question is what are the broken record type conversations that you have with every new and I put this in our audience's terms, but like new quilters or new crafters or even new students. Like what are those repeat conversations?
Now, I'd have to think on this more because I have my whole outline for teaching a new quilting beginner quilt class, which is fresh in my mind because I have one scheduled in a couple weeks. So, but um, yeah, I mean, I have my laundry list of, basic reminders that we all know and abide by as seasoned quilters, but those newbies, they don't know. Things like, putting the fabric down with the selvage at the top and, trimming off that raw edge and then having to flip and how to read the ruler and quarter-inch seam and, where to look on your machine to see if you are at a quarter inch and, what does that even mean? And so all those little basic things definitely come bubbling up as you are teaching.
And the fifth one, actually, I wrote this one down. I kind of took it from a different little section. There's no number five in the book published that I read, but I kind of took number five to kind of go along with that because if we have these questions, these repeat conversations, we can also include in a book misconceptions, common questions, and first steps and projects. Like,
Mm.
especially if you wanted to start a beginner with half square rectangles, you could move someone through the basics into the specific basics for that, what'd you call it? A block?
Unit.
Unit. That's what you called it, a
Yeah,
unit.
yeah.
And
I mean,
then
and that's just kind of my own
yeah,
terminology because you use half rectangle triangles to make other things, blocks and etc. And so you need a unit before you can go to a whole quilt block.
I think that's good. I think that's less confusing because when I was well, anyway, and then move them into patterns to
Right.
finish that off. But when I was a new quilter, I was really confused that everything was called a block. I was like, "But it's not a square."
Right.
So yeah, I kind of like that unit to block. Like I feel like that would clear some things up. But those are the reflection questions I have for you guys. So if that sparked any ideas, I hope you hang on to that because we want to give you a little more advice, talk about our own experiences, and then I have some next steps for you if you really want to dive into this. So Andy, you had a question. Is this a good time?
Yeah, I think so because as people start thinking about do I really want to write a book? Um, a lot of people take their quilting hobby and the first way they make money from it is writing a pattern. And so patterns obviously can be a book. A book is just a big collection of patterns and big, it could be 3, it could be 5, it could be 15. You get to decide as the author um, you can decide how big your book is and what's included. And so, but we've also talked to some people, some quilters that have jumped right into this whole genre of quilt fiction. And they're writing quilt mysteries, they're writing quilt romance, there's the whole thing. So my basic question is, how do you decide fiction or nonfiction? And I mean, it probably is obvious if anybody has an idea, but I think it's important to understand that storytelling is going to go through a nonfiction book just as much as it does a fiction book.
Definitely, definitely. And I that's an interesting question because it would be based off of who we're asking, right? First off, who we're asking. Pros and cons might be a good way to write down pros and cons of which direction you want to go. I feel like nonfiction would be the quicker route just because if, like you said, most of us start in business, we start pattern design with pattern design.
Mm.
And so we probably have our favorite patterns. We probably have patterns that aren't done that we would love to either like group by topic or put a story together with, show a journey about, teach with inside a book in different ways. And it reminds me of a cookbook. As you said, story elements would also go into a pattern book, but it reminds me of a cookbook where you could tell a story where every pattern represents a different part of the story or even a different part of your life and share your life's work. Because
Mhm.
all of us as quilters have been quilting for probably a while, especially of us in business, and we probably have and we know we have beautiful stories because of every single person we've interviewed shares how they got into quilting, and I would love to see that in a book, and I have actually seen that. I have, like, at least 2 books that do that, and they're beautiful quilt pattern books, but they follow a story, and 2 of my favorite follow personal stories, which
Mhm.
are just, like
Yeah.
they're moving and interesting, and it's really cool.
Yeah. And and I guess it's one of those things that my favorite thing to do is read, and I was the kid that brought 9 books home from the library every 2 weeks when my mom would take us to the library. All the Nancy Drew, Little House on the Prairie, all these I love a series, if I can dig in and just get the story after story after story, I love it. So, it's always been kind of in the back of my mind, well, I like to read so much, wouldn't it be fun to write my own novel? And if anybody's ever heard of and now I'm gonna blank on the name, the November NaNoWriMo,
Yeah.
National Novel Writing Month. It happens in November. It's kind of one of these subculture internet phenomenon things that just exploded. So you've got all the books about self-publishing. I've got all the books about writing, just in general, creative writing. Um, and yeah, so I've got these half form books on the few occasions that I've dabbled in the NaNoWriMo month that it could go either way. It could be fiction or nonfiction because I've got ideas for both.
That is so interesting. I'm like, I want to see your books. Like, we had one question that I wanted to pose to you, Andy, and see what you think, just off the top of your head. But when we were preparing for this episode, this was a question you threw out there that I was like, ah, this is great. So I want to ask, what do you think makes a book different than a pattern? What would make a book different than a pattern?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's so much extra in a book. Um, like you were saying, um, you sense an HRT book coming, and I've published HRT patterns. So to turn that into a book, I would want to have a a theme throughout. Obviously, it could be the basics of half rectangle triangles. It could be an ultimate guide. You would think that would be a lot longer, um, and pull in a lot of different things. Um, I typically think a book is gonna have somewhere between 8 to 12 individual quilt patterns. So it there you need to have enough ideas then to, turn that one thing, that half rectangle triangle into more things. So, um, but the other thing I think that makes a book different than a pattern, um, let's say you took something, my other favorite block is the friendship star. You wanted to do a book all about friendship stars. You need to start, like I said, with a story. You're going to tell maybe some of the history about what's known. Why is it called the friendship star? You don't necessarily include that in a standalone pattern. Your standalone pattern is pretty much the one project, the stuff you need to make it, how to make it, and that's it. Where you can pull in some of the the rich community that surrounds all of our different quilting methods when you write a book.
I agree. And I do want to throw out there that if you're thinking, when Andy says 9 to 12 quilt patterns, you can also do small quilt patterns like
Mhm.
pillows, table
Oh
runners.
yeah.
Doesn't necessarily have to be like full quilt size.
Right, right.
No,
And
but
like
I
I
think I
said,
agree.
books can be as long as you want them to be. So if you only have 3 or 4 patterns, but you have a lot to say maybe about the history and how to put it might be a complicated technique. You could write a book that was all about one foundation paper piece thing, and that would be fine.
I can imagine the quilt that, won at QuiltCon this past year. Um,
Mhm. Joan of Arc. Or no, 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 it was the Dignity statue, right?
Dignity, yeah. And I'm trying to remember her name because
Um,
of course I'm blinking too.
and it I'm gonna butcher it because it's not very common. Veruca,
Sounds about right.
Verushka.
Hold on. Pride and Joy Quilting is her Instagram.
Yes, we know that.
I think it's Veruska Zarate. I probably butchered that too. But her quilting, her Instagram is Pride and Joy Quilting, and her pinned post, first pinned post, is exactly the quilt we're talking about right now. I just looked her up on Instagram. But, like, I could see that becoming a book because you could share so much about the history behind the statue is based off of, and she had this article came out where the original artist of the statue saw the quilt and his reaction,
Mhm.
and, I could that would be a beautiful not only visually beautiful, but it could be a beautiful storytell book, and I feel like that would sell well because not only would it have the pattern where you can make your own, or it would have, like, I get so I'm so excited, my brain blanking. I was just like,
Yeah,
"Oh my god, that would be an amazing book." Like, I could just see the pages. I would love to just
yeah,
to turn the pages, have that
yeah.
as just, like, on a
And
coffee table.
while you're talking about that, kind of the way my brain works is that we're talking about Pride and Joy quilting. You talked about Instagram and all the stories that go behind it. And I remember back in this is 20 years ago when I started quilting, blogging was a big thing. And there was a quilter who every year she published all her blog posts as a book. She had them bound like from the photo
Oh.
book people. And so think of that. You're already telling stories on Instagram or your other social media. Though get a think of what theme connects several of those stories, and there's your start of your book.
It's funny you say that because that's exactly how my book started. I pulled blog posts and I started putting them in order of first steps, and that's how I started making this guide that eventually turned into, like, 40 pages, and I was like, "Wait a minute, there's so much more I could add. This could be a book."
Yeah, yeah. So, of course, anybody that's written anything down about their quilts, the process, where you got the inspiration, who's it for, where it ended up, um you can tell all those kind of stories in a book.
I agree. I'd like to move into your experience with your books. Um, I know that you self-published as well. So what made you go to the self-publishing route?
Honestly, it was the time frame of actually being able to get it done and out in the world, because as an unknown, at the time, this is 10 years ago when my mom and I published our first book, Monochromatic Quilts, and we had no industry contacts. It wasn't like, we were some big name quilter on YouTube that companies would be able to recognize. And so we knew it was going to be a hard, an uphill battle, perhaps, to get knock on those doors and get a connection with a publisher or an agent or any, however that would work in the craft world. Um, so, you know, Kindle self-publishing was a relatively new thing at the time, and we figured it out and said, you know what, we know this isn't gonna make, we might be big fish in a very small pond here in our local area and with our local group of quilters, but hey, we'll throw it out there and see what happens. So, um, yeah, that was my initial experience. And what made you self-publish?
I honestly, I went back and forth up until, like, the last couple of weeks, really. Like, I had looked into self-publishing to the point where I was ready to drop the manuscript, or I could take the manuscript to a publisher, and I was really going back and forth, because, like, I wanted this book to be available. So I went self-publishing because the more I heard about traditional publishing and how involved the publisher is and the editors are and how they have certain frameworks, and now I know more after going to H&H. I really went all in on self-publishing with the classes, and I went with one of my friends as she pitched to four, I believe we went to four different publishers. So I got to hear their spiel, I got to hear her pitch, and it was an amazing experience just to be a fly on the wall. I was holding her samples and,
Uh,
like, Vanna Whiting, like, because she she had quite a few that she wanted to show, so I was helping. Um, but what I was worried about was they would change the book.
mm,
They wouldn't answer the questions that I was getting. They would change the content to the point where it wasn't my book anymore.
mhm,
And that's what I kept hearing, what they wanted to make it this, and it didn't feel like my book anymore. That
mhm,
was the sentence I kept hearing, was it didn't feel like my book anymore. So that's when I decided self-publishing, and I figured if I only get 10 sales, I got to help 10 teachers. And now the book has been out for almost a year when this podcast comes out, and it's over 150. So I've helped 150 teachers, and it just, like, it makes my heart just glow. Like, I am so excited just to hear that out loud. To say it out loud, it's just like, it's amazing. Because if I put 150 people in a room together, it would just
mhm.
be like, wow.
Yep, yep,
So that's why I did it, because I didn't want my content changed. I knew the questions that teachers were coming to ask me. I knew the process that really worked for myself and that worked for my clients at the time, who were getting students into their workshops using what I was writing about. And I didn't want that to change. So I went with self-publishing.
yeah, yeah. Um, and I had heard lots of stories of people that had pitched a book, they were working on it, and when I say I didn't want it to take that long, with a traditional publisher, I had heard, 2 to 3 years of work to get before you see your book, and it might have taken that long from the time my mom and I started writing and making our quilts to the time we actually got all the patterns and edits and everything done and had the book in our hand. But, um I've also heard the stories of those book contracts getting cut. And so people would be halfway into a book, they'd have all these samples done, and then, "Oh, yeah, no, never mind, we're not gonna do that right now."
Well, it
So
happened in quite a bit in 2020, right? With the paper shortage, and, like, there were books at the bottom of the ocean because one big airliner, not airliner, ocean liner
mhm,
went down with all of those books, and, like, yeah, no,
yeah.
you're right.
So, and that's not to say that things can't happen when you self-publish and then, uh, have to have shipments of actual books that can, post postal trucks go up in flames randomly here and there. So,
It's always a risk, I guess.
yeah, yeah.
For
But
sure.
I guess one of the other things, with self-publishing that can be a benefit is that with traditional publishers, they do a run of a set number of books, and all those books are printed all at once. And so then you also hear stories about people that now have, 6 pallets of books that they have to keep in their garage or find a storage facility, and they've now got this inventory that they have to worry about. And with services like Kindle that are print on demand, just like everybody's, printing T-shirts by the companies and having them shipped out to customers, we get to do the same thing with Amazon, and, they order the book and one book gets shipped out. So it's really nice not to have to manage all that excess inventory.
Yes, and you can actually, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see my inventory right behind me, it's right there. I keep about 10 books on hand.
Well, of course,
But
yeah.
I don't have to. Yeah, like you said, I don't have to worry about having gigantic amount of books as I am a military spouse. We are active duty. We will be moving like every 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 years really. And the army won't pay to move your business up to a certain amount. So and it's very small. I think the
Right,
last time I looked into it was like a couple $100 that they'll cover. That which is like insurance for my machine.
right, right.
So they're not going to ship pallets of books. And yeah, so it's really nice to have that print on demand where you can order it yourself as a customer and get it printed for you, or you can order as an author and have a small amount on hand and not have to
Right.
worry about, like you said,
Yeah.
pallets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, the same thing goes for printing patterns. If you are vending at an in-person event, if you are a wholesale pattern designer and need to ship out patterns to stores, uh, you do have to manage inventory. And the nice thing about Kindle, as Tori pointed to her inventory, is you can order your author copies. And then if you have an event where, you're going to want to talk about your book and promote your book, those orders are going to start coming in. And rather than direct people to an Amazon site to order the book, then they can just order from you. So head over to True Blue Quilts and find my pattern books and I'll send them right out.
I love that. One other thing I want to touch on was money.
Mhm.
So how much you actually get paid for a book. I think there's a misconception that we make a lot of money when we have a book. You make even less if you go through a traditional publisher because you get what's left over after the publisher takes a cut, the printer takes a cut, and any other services that you have that are taking a little off the top, and then you get paid. And
Mhm.
it's same for self-publishing. You have to pay for print, you have to pay for shipping, and then you get what's left. And but it is typically more, much more than a traditional publisher.
Right, because you could set your own price, and so those costs, like if and I'm just gonna use round numbers, so this is not it's maybe a little bit based in reality, but these are not exact numbers, so you do your research. If an author copy is $10 for me, and I know the post office is gonna charge me, I don't know, anywhere from $3 to $6 perhaps to mail a book out, then right there I have, 15 $16 that I need to cover. So if I sell my book for $20, that's only $5 profit at the most. So you need to come up with some pricing formula, and we've covered that discussion. So we may have to come back to that. But yeah, you definitely want to factor in a good profit for yourself.
And the higher quality your book, the more it's gonna cost. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. I do want to touch on some of the Kindle process though of um submitting your manuscript typically as a PDF, right? You haven't run into any other formats. So it's
Word is the only other one.
Yeah,
And
so
I don't remember if that was Kindle or Ingram Spark because I published with both.
mhm. But either way, you can submit a PDF type document with everything laid out how you want it, and then you get those, drafts, and you get one copy in it, but it's all in full cover color with whatever print quality that you requested, and I remember you actually compared. You did a reel when you had both versions, and you were able to make a decision there on the print quality.
I did. So I put in for Ingram Spark, like I just said, Ingram Spark and KDP, which is the Kindle Direct
Correct, yeah.
printing. And I had both of them in front of me, and I knew I needed to do that. I knew I needed to have it in my hand to make the final decisions on what it was going to be. And I got to see the paperweight, I got to see the color because as my book, and I haven't actually mentioned the name of my book. My book is Workshops Unleashed. So if you haven't heard about my book yet, it's called Workshops Unleashed: How to Design Engaging and Successful Workshops for Quilters and Crafters. So inside there are still pictures. And I wanted to make it colorful to make it engaging for our audience because I know that quilters and crafters are visual. So I needed to make sure that the color was coming through, that it was true, it was pleasant to look at, but it was also a book I wanted people to write in. I didn't want it to just be the cheap yellow paper that you write on and then you see it on the other side. I wanted you to be able to highlight, to write notes on. So I got a thicker paper. And when I originally got my Amazon ones, I went with cheapest on
Mhm.
Amazon because there were not a lot of options on Amazon. You kind of have like two, three. It's not a lot. And I went the cheapest at first to see what the quality was like. It was see-through. The text was gray instead of black.
Yeah.
The color was crappy. And I wasn't a fan of it. And Ingram Spark, the color was better. The print was coming through black even on the cheapest, but the paper was so thin
Oh,
that
no.
you could see through. And I'm like, okay, okay. We gotta adjust the paperweight. We've got to adjust the color. And then when I got the author proof the next time around, and I didn't actually, now that I said that, I don't think I actually got author proof the second time around. I think I just went full force. This is my book. And I figured I'd order a few, and if I really didn't like it, I only had nine, was it
Mhm.
nine? Nine pre-orders? And then I sent out more for my ARC readers. So I figured if it was bad, I'd just reorder them again and send them out again.
Right, yeah.
So to me, it was a good investment. It was a good leap of faith at that point. But yeah, it was really great to be able to order the author proofs, and the author proofs were cheaper even than the author books that I can order now. So that was really nice. I didn't have to spend an arm and a leg just to get a copy to see what it looked like. But yeah, did you get to do author proofs when you did your book?
I
Because I know
did.
you started quite a bit ago. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they gave you an author proof, so same thing, we were able to see the print quality and the colors and everything, and, um, one thing that we did differently from the first to the second, actually 2 things, because the first one was truly a self-publishing effort, and it was just me and my mom going back and forth, making sure it was in the correct format, and I do have to give credit to Kindle Direct Publishing. They spell out the guidelines, so, if your aunt wants to write a family history and have it printed, she can figure it out. They take all levels of author. KDP does a really good job of giving you frequently asked question guides and chat for help and stuff. So no matter your experience, you can figure it out. They'll help you. But we did decide to go to an outside editor and it was someone in the quilt industry that was willing to do some tech edits for us, for some graphic design, help us lay out the book. And we also hired a professional photographer for our second book. So we were able to get really nice, clean, crisp, square images for that second book. And that helped a lot.
That's really good. That was actually one of my questions I want to ask you. So after figuring out the book you wanted to write, what was your next step? And I was curious if you had hired someone.
Um, yeah, we didn't, like I said, we hired someone for the second book, but it was pretty late in the process. We outlined, we made a list of all the quilts that we wanted to include, and I always um kind of griped that my mom had the fun part because she got to do all the sewing and I had to do all the technical stuff of, making sure we had the piece count right in the charts that we included and double check all the math and write all the instructions and design all the graphics for the block layouts and stuff. So, yeah, it seemed, a little uneven for workload distribution. But yeah, you start for a pattern book, a quilt book, you just start making the quilts and then, document every single step along the way so you can figure it out, when you have the sample and then double check that the instructions are correct.
All right. Oh, I guess I could share what I did.
Yeah.
So I sat down to write a guide, right? I was honestly making a lead magnet and I wanted to write a guide of what first steps could a quilting teacher need to get started teaching. And that's when I pulled blog posts. I just started writing. I wrote for 4 hours straight. And then I realized I had the potential for a book. And I knew right away I can't do this by myself. So what do I need to do? And Rachel Rogers was like in the back of my head, like, you need to hire somebody. So that's what I did. I went into my military spouse community and I was like, hey, does anybody do? And I had to look up what role I was looking for. So it was a content editor is what I ended up, asking for and hiring, and her name was Melissa Strange, and she was absolutely amazing. She was a great guide, and then she went in and line edited. So it was accountability, it was going through the book and making sure everything that I was writing fit the theme, it fit in where we're gonna put things. Like, she was very great at mapping the book out with me, going through, the bits and pieces of what needed to be added. She helped make my writing so much better. So by the end, when I was writing the marketing stuff, 'cause I kind of wrote my book in order. Not everybody does that, but my book was kind of written in order. So by the time I got to the marketing part, my writing had improved by like 100-fold. And she's making a lot less like editing requests and like at least big picture editing. And so that was really great to have her as my first hire. And then we edited it. She did line editing, like I said, and then I helped her with the formatting. We kind of teamworked it where we tried to figure out what format goes in KDP, what does Ingram Spark need, like what about the we call them margins. Oh my God, the margins are such a headache. But once you figure it out, it's like, oh God,
Yeah.
and then it flows. But yeah.
Well, and for layouts, you have to think about, okay, it's gonna start on the right-hand page, and what happens if you end on a left-hand page? Do you want a graphic there to start the next one? Do you want something blank? And so, yeah, you really have to that whole editing phase of the final layout type edits of a book are very interesting and depend really on the platform and the guidelines and even the size of your book. Now, one thing I want to kind of take a little bit of a detour, um, before Workshops Unleashed, you had a notebook printed. So what was that experience and how did it compare to, more text?
Well, I was curious on how the whole system worked. I was stuck between this. I don't really want to make any more patterns and I don't know what to do next. And I had this idea for a simple notebook and I couldn't find it. So I made it. And it's just a dot graph notebook. It had a cool, I went on to EQ8 and did a little block to represent some of my quilts, my favorite blocks I put in my quilts. And I just had just a simple they call it 6x9 notebook. I don't have any. I sold out at H&H or else I'd show, but I don't have any. But it's a dot graph on the inside. So all I had to do was like copy the same page in Canva until it hit 120 pages. And then it was at 80. or six, no, 100, well, anyway, probably 180 because then it's 60 pages plus the cover. So it's a cute little notebook. So that was great to get my feet wet because then I understood how KDP worked. I understood what information I needed up front. And I had this cute little simple notebook that I can then, experiment on how to sell with. I love experimenting. I shared it before on our podcast. I approach these new ventures like a scientist where I'm like, oh, what happens when I do this? So what happens when I do that? And what about this color and that color? And I did one based off the 2023 Kona color of the year. And that one did pretty good when I released it. But that got my feet wet. And that was really, it was an easy project. It was super simple to create and then get it up there a lot more than I thought. And it gave me more confidence when it came time to actually self-publish what I would consider a real book. Actually
Yeah.
had words in it.
Right, right, yeah. And that was a big uh, passive income trend for a few years, was the low content book publishing. So those things, like you said, that was just blank sketch pages, but very useful for quilters to have that dot graph paper. And so for our audience out there, your book doesn't have to be patterns, it doesn't have to be a fictional storybook. It can be checklists and guides that are fairly low content, but give people lots of room to sketch and to list and to plan, and you could have a moneymaker.
Yeah. That reminds me of a guy on TikTok, and I don't follow him. Well, I might follow him, but I don't see him often. I only see him when he's advertising his. He calls it a zine,
Yeah.
like short for magazine, and it's 30 pages, I believe he said. Like it's really short, but he self publishes it, and he sold over 1,000 copies, and it's basic sewing 101 stuff. And like you and me, we know there are a ton of people out there you can learn sewing from. And this guy sold like a lot of this very basic 30-page document. So we know that it can be done.
And so now I've got so many ideas for, because I'm thinking of, you know, e- especially as we go into the fall and holiday season, those little things are the add-ons. And so a quilt notebook, plus a a little bundle of fabric is a great gift to give some of your fellow quilters. And so, like I said, it could turn into a moneymaker if you have any type of in-person booth or, vending opportunity. Having those smaller ticket items, those low dollar things, are right up by the register. And then those little tiny books you see at Barnes and Noble at Christmas time,
Yeah.
you could put a couple of your favorite cookie recipes with a picture of a quilt, and put it on a small size. And like I said, my mind is racing.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I did want to share the thing that I
Yes.
mentioned earlier. So with all of my dive into self-publishing. What I love to do is to take people with me when I do something. So we I say we because I put together a team. So one thing that when I was doing my research and when I went to H&H, I spoke to a lot of people who self-published, who were interested in publishing, who was interested in publishing. I followed my friend around, like I said, and watched her pitch and talked to publishers a little bit. But the number that well, two top things that we run into as self-publishers or publishing in general, when it comes to actually taking this book idea we might have and making a reality. The two big roadblocks are photography and marketing.
I would
And of
agree.
And of course, the cost is like a third one, but the two biggest ones that really stop our brain are like, how do I take the pictures for a book to make it look as good as I want it to be? And how do I market it and actually get sales? Because even if you go through a traditional publisher, they still expect you to market and you're the marketer. They can help a lot with like a little bit of PR. They can help get like banners and things like that. They might be able to get you in on some kind of events or with quilt shops a little bit, but you can do your own footwork and get into quilt shops and do your own marketing. So what I've put together is what we're calling the Self-Publishing Incubator, where I have brought in my content editor, Melissa Strange, and Caitlin Fritz, and I hope said her last name right, but she is a wonderful tech editor, a quilt pattern tech editor. And so you have a team of me as your accountability and marketing expert, a content editing expert, and a quilt pattern expert, all in one program to help you self-publish. And we're also talking to a photographer to come in and run a class and a workshop to help you with that. And then if you need to, you can hire her as well, but she's highly recommended. And so you have an entire team that could help you self-publish this book. And it's called the Self-Publishing Incubator, and we are launching it up until September 12th. So you have about a week, I think, when this podcast comes out. So September 12th is when we close signups. And what we're doing is we're not doing a webinar. I'm doing a bit of an email series because I love doing email series, honestly. They're so much fun to plan for me as a marketer. But we are having you book a call. That way you can get your questions answered. We can talk to you about your book idea and see if this team is a good fit for you. So you can find all the information on my website. I'll link it below, but it's the Self-Publishing Incubator. And I've brought all these experts together to help you get your book published within, and we have a time frame, 12 to 18 months. So it does sound like quite the project, but a book is. But we will get you from idea to launch. So we're going to help you market that book and get it out there.
That is so awesome. And, Tori, you are so inspirational. And, that's why I came to you to do this podcast because I was like, Tori gets things done. So if you have a book idea, you have to be in her incubator. She will get you across the finish line. That is going to be so awesome. I can't wait.
Thank you, Andi. That's so sweet. That's a wrap on today's conversation. We hope it gave you something real to take back to your business.
And if you liked this episode, please hit subscribe and leave us a review. It helps more quilters find the show and feel a little less alone on their entrepreneurial journey.
And if you want more support from behind the scenes content to live chats, you'll find more in our Quilting on the Side community on Patreon. And as always, don't forget to do
a little quilting on the side.